Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Weiss, co-chair of Steptoe's International Trade Policy Practice and lead of the firm's supply chain team. Welcome to Supply Chain University, where we dive into the legal, policy, and advocacy issues involving supply chains. To find out more, visit our website at steptoe.com. On this episode, we're talking to my Steptoe colleague, Chris Suarez, about the connection between the Internet of Things and supply chain issues. So thanks so much for joining us, Chris. We're really excited to have you with us here at Supply Chain University.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jeff, and looking forward to sharing my thoughts.
And I'm really digging the minion behind you. My kids are huge fans, so this will definitely make their day when I tell them about that.
That's right. You should tell them I got it at Universal Studios at Orlando several years ago. Hopefully we can go back to enjoying theme parks again once COVID subsides. So.
Yeah, I'm hoping that happens again soon as well. So let's kick off. And for those who are not familiar with the Internet of Things and IoT, can you give us a quick primer on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The IoT is obviously a buzzword these days, and I think most people have some sense of what it is. But to be clear, it's really anything that's connected to the internet. And when we talk about the Internet of Things, that means your watch can be connected to the internet, like a smartwatch, your smartphone. People have heard about connected cars. That would be part of the IoT. Things like drones, sensors, the Ring doorbell in your house, Alexa, smart home devices, those sorts of things. All of that would be part of the Internet of Things. And fundamental to it is that you have some sort of sensor on a device. And that device is connected to the internet. So that gives you useful data and information that you can apply in the real world.
And how did you become interested in the connection between the Internet of Things and supply chain?
Yeah, really, it started around 20 years ago, honestly. Probably dating myself here a little bit, but all the way back in college, I first had a consulting gig. I worked at an internship with Deloitte way back in the day, and through that, I actually got introduced to a technology called RFID, radio frequency identification. This was back in like 2003-4 time frame. And the specific application that they're talking about RFID was with the supply chain. And RFID, if you don't know what that is, it's basically those tags that are in your toll transponders when you're driving around and you're getting your toll deducted on like an Easy Pass. That's RFID. There's a ping from a tower. It activates a battery essentially on the transponder, and that echoes back the radio signal to sort of tell you, hey, pay this toll. It's also the technology that's in these smart cards that you use on subways to like get on the subway where you like do the tap. And all the way back 20 years ago, they were thinking about how they can use these sorts of tags on cards and on boxes and on pallets and things like that to sort of track items along the supply chain to know where they are at any given point in time. And the thought was this could be a more efficient use of tracking than, say, the old-fashioned barcodes where you had to manually scan everything individually. Right. And so that was really, supply chain really was a lot of the initial motivation for RFID technology, which would have its own network, would have its own system, and wasn't connected to the internet writ large. But that was sort of a microcosm of what would ultimately become the Internet of Things. And when people talk about the Internet of Things today, they're still thinking about RFID because RFID is still a technology that's in use and it's still very common. So it's been really cool to over the past 20 years see how it kind of went from this rudimentary RFID tag that you might have on some objects to this much broader concept of the IoT, where you have sophisticated 3G, 4G, 5G networks, where you have all these devices that are connected to the internet, and something a lot broader than simply RFID.
Right. Well, we're not going to mention how many years ago I was in college, but you talked about RFID. I mean, what are some examples? How could IoT be used in the supply chain context?
Yeah, so there's really just so many different ways. And as I just alluded to before, it's really about asset management. And I remember when I was first learning about, RFID in the supply chain, you can, go at many different levels, right? You can tag items or make them connect to the internet at the individual product level. You can go at the box level. You can go at the pallet level. And so this really allows the warehouser or the shipper to really know, what's the status of each item at any given point in time. And as I said before, IoT is really about sensors, right? And so beyond just knowing where an item is, you could put sensors on an IoT device to know its temperature, to know its, particular moisture level, like all of these different types of things that are really relevant, with transporting food and all these other different types of things. One example is obviously the issue with vaccines right now. With these COVID vaccines, you have to transport them at a very, very low temperature. And IoT and those types of technologies have been harnessed to make sure that these vaccines aren't getting too hot along the supply chain, and things like that. And once you're storing them in the hospital, also knowing the status and the temperature and things of that nature. And reflecting this, I was looking at a recent survey from GT Nexus and Capgemini, which found that about 70% of retail manufacturing companies are doing these sort of digital transformation projects where they're transforming their supply chain to integrate the IoT. So this is a real conversation right now, something that's exciting, that's happening, and really interesting. And, one final thought too is, there's also perishable items in terms of like breakability. And so you can also have things like motion sensors that are on these RFID or IoT types of enabled devices. And they will allow you to say, hey, this truck's rattling a lot. You might have some breakage. And so let's identify that at the point of failure rather than, lose tens of millions of dollars by seeing it go all the way across the world and then be defective. So that's another key aspect of IoT is that real-time piece of being able to use these sensors.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, anytime I ever dealt with, a supply chain disruption issue, there was always a question of, do we have enough containers? Do we have enough truck chassis? Where are they? We need to get them, to this state, or we need to get them to the port. And I can see how, the Internet of Things could play, a huge role there. And so I guess, for folks that are wondering like whether or not this is a real proposition or just hype, it sounds like this is a real proposition, and there are real world, uses for this.
Absolutely. And I think like the economic incentives and the fact that, again, 70% are integrating, are trying to move towards IoT, reflects that. And many companies are doing this. And I think one reason why it's a real proposition now, and it may have been less so, honestly, 15, 20 years ago, is because of costs. When I first got initiated into RFID, a big conversation was around these tags being like super expensive. And you had two types of tags, one that's active, which like actually transmits data proactively, and you had these passive tags, which couldn't transmit anything on their own, but had to be activated by the power of the reader. Those passive tags were really cheap, but they didn't really do much. The current modern IoT is more like those active tags, which were like $1, $2, $3 a tag back in the day, whereas these like passive ones were really cheap. Now you're getting these sort of active RFID tags and IoT enabled tags that transmit information and data down to well below $1 into cents. And because of that, it's become a more realistic proposition. And obviously the benefits are legion for it, right? It's going to give you more real-time accuracy of how things are doing on the supply chain. It's going to allow you to automate things more easily. You're reducing paperwork. You're not having to like manually have someone check the temperature and log it in a system. It's just You're getting the data. And you're going to have all of this robust data that you're collecting using the sensors to forecast future needs and inventory. And so it might be one of those things where on the front end, you have to put a lot of investment in to get everything set up. But if you set it up and you have that data, you may be able to identify like dramatic efficiencies in your warehouse, in your supply chain, in the process you're using to get things from point A to point B. And that brings me to a point that's really important, which is that there's a lot of predictive technologies that are going to be exploited in AI-based technologies that are going to be used to leverage the data that you have in the IoT supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, improving supply chain visibility is really the name of the game right now. I mean, certainly the ships coming into port are not going to be getting any smaller, and so to be able to pre-position and have as much time as possible, like you said, make predictions and know where everything in the system is, and not just at one particular port of entry, but other ports of entry in case you have to divert in emergency situations. I can see how that would be really key. So you just mentioned AI, and I'm wondering whether you could say more about, how IoT will foster AI-based applications for supply chain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be clear here, I'm not talking about robots rising up in the supply chain and controlling all of the, points along the supply chain. That's not where we are. And I think, I will say, in contrast to IoT, which I think is a technology that is very much on the horizon, I think AI is sometimes overhyped a little bit, but AI is a technology that's very valuable to make predictions using data and to sort of look at data and figure out, okay, how is this going to improve my efficiency? Or what are some ways that I can do this a little bit better to gain a little bit more value, right? And as you have more data, AI prediction algorithms get better. And so as there's more of a comfort in any warehouse to use IoT, and as there's more comfort along the different points of the supply chain to use IoT, the better that data set's going to be, the more useful it's going to be to make predictions in real time. And so that's where the sort of promise of AI comes. It's with more adoption, it's with more data. You're able to see, what is happening with a data set that reflects a broad range of scenarios, and that makes the predictions more accurate. And frankly, I think that will produce a lot of innovations, because when you're looking at that data, you might see things that you hadn't otherwise appreciated before. So that's where I think the AI bit is exciting, and I think you're going to see more and more of that as you see more of these warehousers and so forth implementing supply chain technologies and IoT in their supply chains.
So we talked a little bit already about, the healthcare benefits potentially for, using IoT in the supply chain. Can you give us some other, use cases where IoT can help in supply chain applications?
For sure. And as you alluded to, Jeff, healthcare is obviously huge. And there are other items in healthcare besides vaccines, obviously blood, and other different medicines are going to need to be transported as well, and so that's going to be super important to have those in the right conditions. Another area that I alluded to before was the food and beverage industry. Staple food items have to be transported properly, otherwise they might spoil or go rotten, and things like that. And again, it's many different types of things. It's the moisture. It's you don't want to have mold developing on your items as they're going through the supply chain. And another area that's really important, obviously, is the tech industry. Right now there's a high need for technology. We've been hearing about a shortage in the world of some semiconductor technology. So that's been an issue, and there's been issues with getting those items to the United States, and there's been concerns around the world about transporting rare earth metals and things like that are needed to create those products. And then you also have other areas of high need, and we have to think too about things like cargo theft, right? Shrinkage is a huge issue. So apart from looking at individual industries, there's just sort of this global concern about shrinkage and theft along the supply chains. And so knowing those sorts of things is going to be important across all industries.
Right. So it sounds like there have been a lot of successful use cases, and there could be others that we haven't talked about, or other future applications. But what do you think it will take to make IoT more of a mainstream application for supply chains and enjoy broader global usage?
Yeah, well, it's part of the reason why I wanted to do this presentation. I think a big piece of it is just the awareness and understanding. A lot of people say IoT, IoT, IoT. But usually that sort of ends with, oh, there's going to be some connected cars and there's going to be some, great use of Amazon Alexa and things like that. But there's not much thought beyond that usually when you have this conversation. And really, it's important for people to understand that this is about these sensors, right? And that you can apply these sensors that are connected to the internet to virtually anything. And that just opens up so many doors and so many exciting opportunities. And I think sometimes there's a lot of inertia in terms of having done things the same way for many, many years. And so disrupting the supply chain, so to speak, or the supply chain methodologies, it does take a lot of movement. But as I alluded to before, I think the cost piece is going to help motivate more people and more industries to get engaged in the IoT. Just as a point of data, as I said before, an IoT sensor was about $1.30 per sensor in 2004, and in 2018 it went down to around 44 cents. And now it's been 3 years since then, so now you're probably even closer to a quarter or even lower than that in some circumstances, because the cost of a sensor too depends on the type of sensor. Is it a temperature sensor? Is it a so there's many different types of sensors, and those costs are going down. And so it's going to be a case by case basis depending on the application. But I think as you see more creativity around designing these IoT-based supply chain systems too, you'll have maybe more off-the-shelf consultants or providers who are helping industries make this transition. And so that's why I think there is going to be some continued development around this, and there's cause for optimism.
One other tech issue, blockchain. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the connection between blockchain and IoT and how that could be used to enhance supply chain operations.
Yeah, for sure. And there's been a lot of talk about that around using IoT in connection with blockchain. And I think where blockchain is very useful as a technology is sort of knowing about like the chain of custody of items. Like, at any point in the supply chain, who had the item and where was it passed. And sort of, keeping that record very solid is very important, obviously. And so that's an area where I think that's going to be really exciting. And so you can, use a blockchain technology to sort of track your items in connection with these sensors and get the benefits both of the IoT and having the data set that allows you to make good predictions, but also the sort of power of blockchain to make sure you have like a good accounting ledger, so to speak, to be able to track your items, at every point of possible failure along the supply chain. So that's really valuable.
So stepping back from those issues, so if you're a company and you're starting to think about, your digital transformation journey, potentially using IoT, some of the other technologies we've talked about to improve your operational efficiency, your supply chain resiliency, what are the kinds of things that a company should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think I've kind of said it before, but I think the real point is that there are a lot of opportunities here. And so, to be transformational, to be innovative, you really got to focus on the opportunities. Now, to be clear, you don't want to be naive. You have to look at the challenges and you have to consider the costs and all those things. But I think by focusing on the opportunities and focusing on what are things I can predict, as a result of having this data that will allow me to be more efficient. What is some information I can gain from this that will allow me to make these little tweaks, along the supply chain that may save me millions and millions of dollars. I think focusing on that and sort of keeping the goal in mind and keeping and thinking about what are all the potential efficiencies I can gain by having data. I think that's where the excitement comes in, and that's where being resilient about this comes in, because obviously it's a new technology. There are challenges to adoption, but there is an opportunity to really think creatively and to seize the moment, so to speak. I mean, we're right on the cusp of 5G. That hasn't been implemented completely yet across the country, but we're starting to see pockets of 5G. And with that, the amount of bandwidth and the amount of ability to leverage the data in an IoT system is going to be pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's so many different applications of this, and there are, at least from the the U.S. context and probably in other contexts as well, there are so many different areas of policy development where I could see a use for this, whether it's new anti-forced labor rules, potentially stronger Buy American rules, product regulations with respect to circular economy, or GHG footprint, rules requiring, cybersecurity in the electric grid, with respect to, components, component sourcing. Same thing with respect to, the telecom rules that that Commerce is administering. So it just seems like, using some of these technologies in those contexts to improve compliance, could be really useful. And also, like you said, in a forward-looking way, use it to be able to get ahead of some of these things. In terms of the legal issues with IoT, what are some of the legal issues that companies should be aware of?
Yeah, definitely an important issue, and one where you'll want to think about this proactively as you're designing any IoT supply chain system. I'd say the main ones are privacy, cybersecurity, IP, and contractual issues. Privacy and cybersecurity come to mind immediately. Obviously, we've seen a lot of issues in the media lately. I live in Virginia. There was a whole issue with the pipeline, with ransomware, right? Anything that's connected, creates a cybersecurity risk, and we have to be mindful of that, and we have to implement very secure and robust systems. That is obviously one of the fears I think individuals have in moving to the IoT. With the opportunities with the data does come the risk of hacking, and does come with the risk of cybersecurity issues. Obviously, another issue is privacy, because obviously. I wouldn't say there's a right of privacy to, an individual vial of vaccine that's moving along the supply chain, but who is around that vaccine? Who are the individuals who are being effectively tracked when the truck is moving around? What are the implications of using all of this data around individuals who might be working on the supply chain, right? And to the extent that, products have an intended destination, what's the privacy right of the individual whose information or products may be being exposed along the supply chain because all this data is out there and being collected and so forth. So there are privacy concerns about that, obviously, that are going to need to be discussed and continue to be addressed over time. IP, obviously, there's a lot of IP rights that are intellectual property rights that are at issue. There's going to be patents. There's going to be trade secrets. You're going to have standards essential patents because you're going to have 5G related and 4G related and infringed if you're exploiting a network using the IoT. There's going to be patents on the IoT devices themselves and the sensors and all those types of things. So those are things you just need to be mindful of when you're implementing a system. Are you clear of the IP risks? Or do you have your own IP where that's part of your, business strategy, that you have good IP relating to use of the IoT in the supply chain, and maybe that's a benefit for you that you can use as part of your strategy. That's an opportunity as well. Usually, when we think of legal stuff, we think of the negative, the risks, but there's opportunities with the legal aspects as well. And then, of course, there's contractual issues which apply to pretty much everything. And you need to make sure that you have good contracts and that you understand the technology enough to make good decisions in terms of what contractual provisions are in there when you're dealing with these issues. So there are going to be a lot of issues that are going to continue to be raised legally as the IoT develops. Those are sort of 4 high-level buckets that I think are going to be important.
So it looks like we're almost out of time for this episode. So Chris, want to give you the last word. Any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I just say, look, I love the IoT. I've been thinking about these issues for a really long time, and I've enjoyed practicing law, where I've been able to learn about the IoT and reflect on its development. And I just would say it's a super exciting time to be talking about these issues. And I really hope that folks in the supply chain industry keep it in mind as they work to improve their supply chain efficiency and, add economic value along the supply chain. I think it's going to create some amazing opportunities and some really fun and interesting opportunities to sort of grow your business and innovate. So I hope to continue to, even though this is a university where we're teaching folks, like I want to continue to learn about this, and I hope other folks are as excited about that as I am.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate your coming on and sharing your excitement about the connection between IoT and supply chain. And I think we're all really excited about the potential as well, and look forward to continuing the discussion on IoT and supply chain as the law and policy develops.
Absolutely. And thanks again, Jeff, for having me. It's been a really fun conversation, and look forward to continuing it as well.
Great. So that's it for this edition of Supply Chain University. You can find this in all of our videos at steptoe.com. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.